And so David's stand against Saul, and we just want us to look here at the remaining points really, and how he responds to manipulation. And remember, this is manipulation from the king, where we might not think we even have the ability or the right to stand against that. We might feel compelled to give in to whatever it is that the king's trying to take to get from us. But David stands against Saul's manipulation with courage. First, how does he show courage?
He agrees to go.
What?
He agrees to go.
Yeah, he agrees to go. He goes out and he fights the Philistines. And again, brings back 200 foreskins as opposed to 100. And so he responds to that with courage. We go back to the text then in verse 28 and 29, and it says, "But when Saul saw and knew that the Lord was with David, and that Michal, Saul's daughter, loved him, Saul was even more afraid of David. So Saul was David's enemy continually." So everything has been foiled, and not only that, now he looks at David and Michal and he sees, goodness, this is worse than I even thought, because not only has he survived, but my daughter is totally head over heels in love with David. And so he has gone from up to his knees, up to his chin in terms of what he's trying to accomplish here in David's life. Because now he's in the family. Now he is a part of the king's family at this point. Verse the point then is this, and it is that what he sees in David isn't simply the courage and the love between his daughter and David and all this fearlessness. He sees the presence of God. And just as we looked at the last time, where when Saul sees the presence of God in David's life, when he recognizes that God is working in him and through him, his response is fear. It's one thing for David simply to be courageous, but when he sees David acting in ways that go beyond what the abilities of David are, he recognizes that God is with him. And when he sees that all his attempts at foiling David are in fact just proving that God is the one that's behind David and what David is doing. And so David stands against Saul's manipulation with the Lord's presence. God is with him. And the further on this goes, the more obvious that becomes. Not simply to David, but to Saul himself. Verse 30 then says, Then the commanders of the Philistines came out to battle, and as often as they came out, David had more success than all the servants of Saul, so that his name was highly esteemed. And so two things happen. And remember this. This is a result of Saul's actions. Saul's attempting to manipulate. Saul's attempting to put David in a dangerous place where David would be killed. That's his intention. And what happens every time he does something like this? Every time he pushes him to the front of the line, every time he allows him to take the sling and go towards Goliath, every time something happens, what happens with David? Yeah, success. And so two things happen, and one is that. It is that God used Saul's actions to make David more successful. So no matter how manipulative Saul was, God was using it to make David more successful. And the second thing that happened, what was the second thing that happened? There were two things mentioned there. He became more well known. And so God used Saul's actions to make David more famous. David became more well known. Why was that going to be a problem for Saul? What happens? What's correlated with fame? Certainly for David, maybe everybody, but for David particularly. What happens when people love him? People love him. And when people love him, Right, right. And so what's happening, David's more well known, David's more loved. All of those things are going to make David even more of a problem for Saul than he was in the beginning. And so it was always God's plan for David, but Saul is God's instrument in advancing David, in moving him into a place where he's going to be successful, and he's going to be more well known, and he's going to be loved by his people. And all of those things are part of the story of David that Saul unwittingly is a part of in bringing that about. And so God used Saul's actions to make David more famous. Then verse 20 says, as for you, or no, verse 20 doesn't say this. I want to go back. I want to refer to this. Genesis chapter 50, verse 20. The story of Joseph. And if you remember that whole story, of one verse from it here, you remember the whole story? The brothers wanted to get rid of him. Again, a very similar kind of thing. They're putting him selling him, throwing him in the pit, whatever. They had the argument over whether they should kill him, and somebody says, hey, let's just sell him to the traders. Whatever it was that they wanted to do, then years later, when they come to Egypt looking for food, and here Joseph is in a place of supreme authority, and when they find out who Joseph, the brothers find out who Joseph is, what's their thought process? They're afraid of him. He's gonna kill us. He's gonna get even with us. And so Joseph has this famous line that he says to them, and this was the snow camp theme this summer, or this winter. As for you, you meant evil against me, but God meant it for good, to bring it about that many people should be kept alive as they are today. And so in that same way, in the story of David, what Saul meant for evil, God used for good. Everything that Saul did, everything that he was doing to undermine, to get David out of the way, to take David's life, in some way became the foundation to David's success as king later on. And so what they meant for evil, God used for good. So I think that it's good for us to sometimes think about that in our own life. And let me just share from my own perspective on this. And when we were, it'll be on April 12th, it'll be 15 years since we've been at Crossview. That's like unbelievable. That's hard to imagine that's the case. But when I left there about this time of the year, it was the end of March. When I left there, did not leave in good terms, and it was a really dark time. It was a frightening couple of weeks at least, and even it went on before that for a period of time. But when I left there, I looked back and I thought, man, there were people that meant for harm. There were people that really were intended to do wrong to me in that time. And I don't whine about that. I don't look back at that and complain and be angry at what happened. Why? Because I can look today and say what somebody else meant for evil, God meant for good. And we were talking at breakfast. We were talking at breakfast just a couple of weeks ago, and we were making a joke about something that had happened back at that time, and Fred commented, "Well, it was a good thing that didn't happen." He said, because what has happened now would not have happened if that would have happened, what we were talking about previously. So I look at that and I say, yeah, you know what? What somebody meant for evil, God meant for good. And so here we are 15 years later, God blessing us in the ministry that we have here. And I think if any of us would really maybe pause and think back at some kind of painful times in our life, we could probably see that same story, where what somebody meant to do harm in our life, God used for good. And it goes to that Romans 8:28, which kind of echoes that in the New Testament, that that God uses all things for good for those that love the Lord, those that are called according to his purpose. And so Saul's manipulation really becomes just an instrument for God to use in order to bring out about his perfect plan. I like the quote. Maybe I put it on there since it was Valentine's Day last Wednesday when we were initially supposed to do this. But I like the quote that's on there from Jack Hyles. I can't make you love me, but you can't keep me from loving you. I think that's a great little inspiration for us as Christians. Oh, this is so cute. Cindy and Fred are like smiling at each other. Yeah. Yeah, I believe that was Travis Tritt, wasn't it? But you know, in our world, in our culture, I think this applies in this way. We can look at that with our relationships with our spouses and stuff. But more importantly, we could look at that as Christians. That when we're looking at those who are apart from Christ, those who are not followers of Jesus, and we can't. We no matter how nice we might be to them, how good we might be, we're not going to make people love us. But as Christians, we should not allow them to stop. That shouldn't stop us from loving them. We need to love those that are not of the fellowship, with the understanding that might be the means by which God brings them into the fellowship. And in some way, that probably also applies to the story of David, who I think still has a devotion to Saul. Even though Saul despises him, he's still devoted to doing the work that he has been called to do. He believes by God in Saul's kingdom.